and I gave other people a fair warning earlier too. I anticipated doing this talk with other people, but nobody offered themselves up to do the talk with me. So I didn't expect to cover all 4 of these subtopics myself, nor did I have the free time to prepare to talk about all those topics. So I did my best to whip up this little slideshow to kind of give some kind of organization to this talk, but some of this is going to be off the cuff. Just saying right out the gate that's what it's going to be. Let me list all the things in the order of how much I know about them. Starting with responsiveness and just making responsive websites using CSS. That's the thing I know the most about. Then we'll trickle down to AMP. I know a lot about AMP now just because I've been learning about it a lot. I spent a lot of time researching it. I don't actually use it for anything, but I've just been learning about it. Then we go down to PWAs, which we're going to talk about. I actually know a fair amount of those, but I've never built one myself. But I know enough about them to educate you guys on what they are and why you should consider making your site into one. And then all the way down to notifications. Don't know a whole lot about that, or the plugin that we're going to be looking at that does that. So some of this is going to be like discovery on the fly on my end, and then some of it will be actually like stuff that I have known a lot about for a long time. So just wanted to give you guys a fair warning there. Had I had other people that would have agreed to do this talk with me, it probably would have been a much more thorough and, informative, hardcore thing. But yeah, I'll do my best. All right. So we're going to talk about why the mobile experience matters. I feel like the font on this should be a lot bigger in hindsight. Sorry about that. Anyway, so user experience is probably the most important thing in my opinion. If users are forced to zoom, pinch, scroll horizontally on your page, they will get the impression that the site is old or dated and therefore assume that it's not very relevant. And then of course, content strategy. Mobile devices change the way users navigate sites. I don't know if everybody's aware of that. A lot of people are used to the main menu navigation. And we're finding that as mobile navigation becomes more of a thing, people care less about using a main menu, and they actually just want to hit a home page and just scroll down the page and navigate through the website using whatever buttons they find as they scroll down the home page. So it's important to make sure that your site's homepage content at least somewhat resembles a summative outline of your site's main navigation. I was going to demonstrate exactly what I mean, but I'm just going to keep it moving, and if you guys want to see an example, I'll find one later. Now, probably the more important thing and the sexier thing that people talk about these days when it comes to making sure your site is responsive is the search engine optimization side of it. Google has made ridiculous changes over the past, I want to say, 1.5 to 2 years to their ranking algorithm that definitely favors websites that are responsive and are good on mobile devices. I'll give a couple of examples in a second, but the most recent change in Google, did anybody see all the news that hit like a week or two ago about the logos? How they're going to start showing favicons in the search results? If you don't know what I'm talking about, any of you can just pick up your phone right now and Google anything on google.com or whatever, or the Google app. Go ahead and, I don't know, Google this meetup or something. You're going to find that there are now icons that show up next to every search results. And you can only see that on your phone right now. So if you do that on your PC, you go to Google, type in whatever on your computer, you're not going to see that. But you will soon. They released that feature first on mobile. So that's why on here it says, it was rolled out to mobile first, as if that's some kind of a subtle hint by Google to make your websites, think about it mobile first, yeah? So, that was a big thing that happened, I believe, last week is when they rolled that feature out. And so, if you don't have a favicon for your website, and if you're not aware what a favicon is, the favicon is like up here. You see how like the tab has this little logo up in the tab, that's our favicon. And the Meetup's favicon is their M, and the WordCamp Omaha for this year is this little outline of Nebraska, right? And so it finds your favicon and displays it in the Google results, and it won't do that on here. You'll see it doesn't do it here yet, but in the news articles that I've been reading anyway, they say that it will soon do it for desktop, but they release that feature on mobile first. So it just goes to show, like, Google really does care about mobile more so than anything else these days. Does everybody here, how many people know that they rank HTTPS higher than HTTP, meaning that you have an SSL certificate? Okay. Does anybody know, well, did anybody here know that that's partially because of mobile devices? Yeah. Because, like, we now have no way of predicting exactly where somebody's going to be visiting a website from, or what network they're going to be on, or if they're going to be on 3G or whatever. And so it's more of a security threat. And so Google feels a responsibility to make sure that websites you go to are secure if you're exchanging, your credit card information and stuff like that. And when you're out in random places on your phone, it's a lot easier to snatch that information if you aren't using an SSL certificate. So again, phones are just changing everything, and SEO is definitely one of those things. So if Google knows that your site is optimized for phones, one of those things being an SSL certificate, believe it or not, you get a giant boost in SEO ranking. So let's go ahead and look at some ways that we can kind of optimize our website for a mobile experience. Some of them are going to be really obvious, and some of them are probably not. And then for the people that say, like, not many people visit my site from a phone, and I don't really care about SEO, so meh. I would encourage you to check out, if you use Google Analytics, I would highly encourage you to go into Google Analytics and see, like, what the change has been over time, even on your website, how many people access your site on mobile. I was going to use our website, the wpomaha.org website, as an example, but it did not prove my point, so I'm not going to do that. But I could definitely show you some other websites where it would. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. It just depends. Different websites are different, Since we're live streaming, I'm not going to dive into my clients' analytics, because I don't know if they really want that out there on the internet permanently forever. But yeah, just take my word for it and Google it if you don't believe me. The amount of traffic on the web to regular websites on a phone has been gaining ridiculous momentum, especially in the past 10 years, and every year that goes by, it gets more and more. So if you think your site doesn't attract that many people on mobile, I think you'd be extremely surprised. Maybe it's because a lot of people that go to wpomaha.org do it while they're at work, and so they're on a desktop. I don't know. At least that's when I'm at that on it. Hopefully my work doesn't see that. So responsive web design, or RWD, which I didn't even know was a thing. Oh, I should put it back in presentation mode, huh? Sorry about that. I'm unprofessional. So in my opinion, this is like the base level improvement that you can make for any website when it comes to making sure that you are considering your mobile users. You can, first of all, make sure that to do your due diligence here, you can cover or check a lot of boxes, I guess, by just making sure you get a good theme. Are there themes out there that are not quote unquote responsive these days? Probably, but I think now that we're in about 2019, the vast majority are already responsive right out the gate. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a theme these days that is not responsive. However, it's still a good idea to make sure that the word responsive is somewhere on the page of the theme. I'm not going to demonstrate that. I think you guys can all figure that out for yourselves. Plus, depending on where you're looking at themes, you're going to look in different places to make sure it's responsive. But just make sure that when you're checking a theme, make sure it has the word responsive on there somewhere. Also, if you don't know, like let's say they don't have the word responsive on there and you just want to check to see if it is or not. For those that don't know, the easy way to see if a website is responsive is you can go to the site like this and either right click and click inspect, or you can hit F12, or you can go up into the menu and tools or whatever. There's a bunch of different ways to get to it. I usually just right click and do inspect. And then you can use this little icon here in the inspect toolbar. It says toggle device, and it will change the way things look. Usually when you're in this mode, it's better to have the toolbar off to the right like this. And then you can choose which device. And so the idea is that it should change the layout dramatically, especially the navigation, once you're in a responsive mode. So notice how that this menu is not like this at all when we're in full screen. And so that right there tells you it's responsive. Now, the question I asked myself when I was preparing for this talk was, is that how Google figures out if your website is responsive? And I highly doubted it, because I'm like, they're probably doing it programmatically, and I don't think that the bots are like resizing the browser and stuff while they're crawling your site to see how the visual things on the pages are reacting to the resizing. And so I did a little bit more research, and I found that one of the things that it does is it looks for this meta tag in your HTML. Oh gosh, I don't know how to do slideshows clearly. If you have the meta name viewport in there, that is one of the things that Google uses while it's crawling your page to determine whether or not your website is responsive. I didn't know that actually until I was preparing for this talk. With that said, you should never really have to worry about manually putting that in there, because as long as you're using the theme that is responsive, it should already include that for you. Also, WordPress made a bunch of improvements, I think back in 4.5-ish or 4.4-ish or something, to try to make your website more responsive right out of the gate, so that WordPress itself is more responsive. Whether or not the inclusion of that meta tag is part of that, I'm not entirely clear. I didn't get that deep down the rabbit hole, but I'm guessing probably it would be in the header.php of your theme, in case there's any developers in the class that are curious about that. Cool. So testing your page for responsiveness. Another way to see if your site is responsive is you can go to this URL right here, search.google.com/test/mobile-friendly, and type in the URL of your website. And it will test it and tell us. I have not done this yet, by the way, even when I was making this slideshow. I just totally skipped that step. I was like, sure it is. Let's keep it going. Like I said, I didn't have as much time as I wanted to prepare for this talk, so I thought other people were going to be doing it with me. Yes, this is the exciting part of the talk, in case you're wondering. Holy cow, this takes way longer than I thought it would. All right, well, while we wait for this, does anybody have any questions so far?
Well, I know in these tests, a lot of times they'll give you criticism about, like, if your tap targets are too small for people's fingers, or if they're too close together, those sorts of things. So I think in this test, they do render the page at different widths. But the question is whether when they index it, that's part of the mobile-friendly test. I'm not sure.
I'm guessing whatever engine that they use to do this, it's tapping that. I don't know why they would build it two different ways more than once. Yeah, that would be my assumption. I mean, I don't know. I wish we had Google to ask, but yeah, my guess is it's probably going to the page, like doing it live, probably in case you're actually in the process of developing your page and you're making changes and then doing this check to see if your change is being seen by Google. Otherwise, it would just cache whatever results it got from a previous crawl. But yeah, that would be my guess, especially seeing how long it took. I don't know why it's not showing. Oh, I know why. Because the slideshow thing, probably layer slider, I think is what we use on here. That's what that giant gap is. But anyway, yes, the page is mobile friendly, so we passed. Yay. I don't know of a website that's not mobile friendly to make it do something different. But yeah, I would assume that would happen. Anyway, there's a tool you can use. I'm sure there are other tools out there. We're not talking about speed here, although speed is most certainly a concern when it comes to what they consider to be responsive. And I think I think it's in a later slide. In a later slide, I'll go through, there's a checklist. I found a website that had like a list of things when it comes to SEO. Might be on the next slide, I can't remember. Cool, I guess not. All right, well, let's just get right into what is AMP. Hold on a second, is that? I should have added another slide between these two. Before we get into AMP, I'm just going to go off the cuff here and talk about some other things that are encompassed in responsive design that is not on the slide. So when it comes to CSS, it's important to understand what media queries are. Does anybody here, first of all, how many people here even know what CSS is and write it and stuff? Okay, cool. So there are some people that don't. Okay, so let me just quickly go over what CSS is, like really quickly. So CSS is what controls the look and feel of a web page, and I think it's safe to ditch this, and then we'll put this back down at the bottom so that we don't get the toggle menu action, because what I want to do is do some squishy action here. Okay, so as we hover over the different parts of our web page, so this is all of the like HTML that's used to create this web page, where it talks about the JavaScript workshop series that we're doing this summer. And when we hover over any one of these and we click on them, it shows us the styles over here in the right side. This is all CSS that's attached to this HTML document that tells the browser, which is an application on your computer, how to display all of the things that are in here. Whether it be color, size, orientation, position, all of those things are included in CSS. Why is CSS important when it comes to responsiveness? Well, because that's how we're doing this thing where we decide whether or not, or I guess how to show the main menu. In this full-size screen, we're showing the main menu like a normal desktop, but as we change the size of our screen, let me get this out of the way a little bit, as we make it smaller and smaller and smaller, and I apologize for the slowness of my computer, you can see it takes away the main menu and decides it's going to like squish the menu into this other area. Okay, the way it does this is using CSS and a little thing called media queries in CSS that was just added during the introduction of CSS 3. And so what media queries are is a block in your CSS that tells the browser to apply certain styles or sets of styles upon certain widths. So it says, if the browser is between this width and that width, then apply this other set of styles. And so little do you know that this menu is actually on the page no matter what size it is. It's just that when we're over a certain width, it hides it. and then we use CSS and media queries to make it show up. So basically we turn the main menu off and turn this mobile I don't know, this isn't really like a hamburger menu. I mean, this is the hamburger icon, but like it's more of like a slide out menu. I don't know what you would call it, but it's a mobile solution so that we can use less of the screen real estate to show the menu and more to show the content. And so that's all being done with CSS and media queries. And Google does look for that when it crawls your page. When it does that, it loads all your HTML, which also loads your CSS. It looks for your CSS, it looks for media queries, it finds media queries. It probably checks a flag somewhere that says, yes, this is using media queries, and it's doing stuff in the media queries. And like he said earlier, they do render like views at different sizes when they analyze. So when they see things like that happen, that's another like indicator that your site is responsive. When it starts moving things around and changing the way the website looks based on what size, specifically what width the website is. So changing 3-column layouts to 1-column layouts, and hiding and removing the main menu and the mobile menu in certain situations. That's kind of what media queries do. I feel like I'd be doing you a slight disservice if I didn't show you what a media query looked like, even though this isn't really like a dev talk. But yeah, I'll show you real quick what media queries. There's actually like a media, does anybody know that website? Here we go, mediaqueries.es. This is a pretty cool site, and they just highlight high profile websites that do this. It was a bigger deal when it first came out. But yeah, it's just at a glance, shows you real quick what different websites look like, and they just highlight different websites as they discover them. I don't think the site really gets as much traffic as it used to when media queries were still new. But this is how we use media queries. In case you're curious and you know a little bit about CSS. The big one, the most common use case is going to be something like that, where you've got the @media tag, and then you dictate usually not just a max width, but also a min width. And so what that does is it tells CSS, hey, between these two sizes, apply a certain set of CSS rules. So that could be any CSS in the world. It could be hiding stuff, it could be changing color, it could be changing layouts, it could be changing positioning. And so that's the CSS side of responsive design. And it actually plays a huge part in the usability of your website. So when we talk about user experience, UX, and actual web design as opposed to web development, if you're not doing this kind of stuff these days, you're largely behind the curve. And the way we solved this problem before CSS3 and media queries existed was either making a different version of your website altogether that you put like under a subdomain like mobile.whatever.com, which is a terrible way of doing it these days. And then another way that we did it was using JavaScript. You could do browser detection with JavaScript and then display a whole different set of HTML and CSS on the fly. Also not a great way of doing it by today's standards. So the inclusion of media queries actually dramatically improved the web when CSS3 came out. And so, yeah, and for the people that are wondering what the support is on this, all major browsers, including the dreaded Internet Explorer, I believe all the way down to 8 even, right? Or maybe even 7, I think 8.
Scroll down, you'll see.
Does it tell us on this page?
Doesn't MDN usually
I don't know.
No, maybe not that one.
But there's always the old can I use? And we could just do media queries and see what.
I guess it's on that.
Yeah. Hold on, what? Yeah, I think this is what we're talking about right here. I was like, wait a second. What is this up here? Interaction media features? I guess I don't understand what these different categories of media queries are. Anyway, what we're talking about is this. And as you can see, it's green across the board. So this is not like brand new bleeding edge technology for those that are wondering. Yeah. 8. I guess 8 did not include it. That's good to know. So 9 and up. Not that it matters anymore, because if you're using 9 still, well, you're probably not here. All right. So any questions about media queries? I don't want to beat that one too much. Like I said, that's kind of like base functionality. It's like if you're not doing that, that's basically the easiest way. And again, another reason why it's the easiest way is because your theme is probably going to take care of a lot of it for you. And we're talking about WordPress here. We're not talking about building websites from scratch. And so for that reason alone, you don't really have a lot to worry about here. I will say that and when it comes to shopping for themes, or even if you're not paying for the theme, like when you're going through the process of selecting a theme for your site, one of the primary things that I do personally is I check to see what the theme looks like on mobile, because customizing that later is a huge pain. Like one of the most complex things to customize on a theme is the navigation. And to avoid that altogether and focus on customizing other areas of the site, that's one of the main determining factors that I use when I'm selecting themes for clients. Is I check to see what the mobile navigation looks like compared to the main navigation, and look at how it changes when I change the size. And so if you do that while you're shopping for themes, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache moving forward, because I just taught a whole semester class on web design, and the first thing I told all the students in that class was, while you're going through and choosing a theme that hopefully you're going to customize, this is a web design class, make sure you're checking what that theme looks like on mobile. And I showed them the trick I showed you guys earlier, and believe it or not, some of them didn't. And they got downgraded when we showed off what it looked like on mobile. And it was like, well, all you had to do is just check what the theme looked like. And if you didn't like what it looked like, just choose a different theme. Luckily, we have a lot of themes to choose from these days. So yeah, make sure you're doing that when you're selecting a theme for your WordPress site. Any questions about any of that before we get into AMP? AMP is kind of weird. Cool. Okay. So what is AMP? AMP stands for Accelerated Mobile Pages. It's developed in part by Google. And it's an attempt to solve the problem of web content being too data intensive for mobile networks to provide a reactive and snappy experience when interacting with a website on a mobile device. So interestingly enough, what we're talking about is almost the same exact solution that I spoke about earlier, which is like making a whole nother version of your website just for mobile, which I said is not a good idea. AMP is in a way kind of a step back towards that direction, except it's still not entirely that. We're not doing a subdomain. We're not maintaining two versions of the same website. What we're using is a tool that will kind of dissect your website and then put it back together using all of the same content, but with a different layout altogether, and with different, and basically omitting entire parts of the page when necessary to improve performance. So basically reducing the footprint of your page in terms of the data that it needs to download to your phone in order to render the page. And what most people use in WordPress is a plugin called AMP for WP. The way you set this up is you install the AMP for WP plugin, you go through the setup wizard, and then you can test it using all of the steps listed in this blog article and many other blog articles, I suppose. Talk about it, install, activate. They tell you to set up the Google Analytics, which you really don't need to do. You configure the plugin, you go through all this, there's like a gajillion settings in this thing. But more importantly, you test and validate after you set it all up. Where did it tell me how to do it? Here is where I figured it out. So I did this yesterday in preparation for this talk because I had never used this plugin before. And I was like, okay, I got it installed, I got it activated. I went to the web page like on my phone and it still looked exactly the same as it did before. And I'm like, okay, so what does this plugin do? And then I discovered that in order to see what the page looks like on mobile, you have to actually go to any one of your pages, or actually specifically posts right out the gate. It'll only do it for posts and the home page. So I'll go to the home page in this case and I'll kind of show you exactly what it's doing. Be prepared, it's not extremely attractive, but that's kind of the idea too. You can just type AMP after it or any post. And so this is what the homepage of wpomaha.org looks like when it's presented using AMP. So I suppose a good thing to do at this point would be to shrink the screen size so that we can more like accurately present what it would look like on a phone. And that's it. So notice how there's a lot of content missing, which means a lot of JavaScript is missing. And if we were to do a speed test on the regular one versus the AMP one, you would see that the water, well, I guess we could just go ahead and do that real quick. We've got the time, it's only 7:30. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Anybody ever done a speed test on their website? Raise your hand if you've done a speed test before. That's scary. All right, well, hopefully I know what you guys are all doing. Oh, this is a speed test on that. It's totally different.
I was gonna say, I've done that
really excited to
before.
see how you're going to use this tool.
I've used
I always forget the names of them. Google will help me remember. Yes, GT metrics, that's what we want. There's a couple other ones that are really good too, but this is a really good one. So we'll just put in wpomaha.org on one tab, and then before I do this, I'm going to, well, I guess I could just duplicate this tab. And then we'll type in /amp. Let's fire these off. And it's going to go through and analyze both of these web pages. We'll see which one gets done first. As predicted, this one is going to get done first. Yay, look at that. We get an A, 95%. Fully loaded, 3.4 seconds. Not that great, actually. A little surprised by how long that took. And we got a C over here. Yeah. So, a little slower, 5.4 seconds. Actually, still not that bad. Well, I expect a little bit faster. If we look at the waterfall on these, it shows all the stuff that it loads in order to do it. And a dramatic difference in the size of the waterfall, which obviously translates into much faster loading time because there's less stuff to load. So yeah, that's kind of the idea. You can go in and customize like what different pages look like and the layout, and there's different styles. There's a ton of settings in this thing. Where were we? Yes, here, yep. Let's get out of this part. Let's go to, let's see, AMP. Touch this. And there's a ton of stuff that you can do in here. And basically what they attempt to do here is like give you all of the stuff that you can do using AMP just in a static site, using kind of a menu area in WordPress, which is pretty cool, actually, if you think about it. So you can just customize a whole bunch of stuff that's specific to the AMP version of your page. I don't know exactly how Google knows like whether to show the AMP version or the regular version of your website. I didn't get that far down the rabbit hole. There's a lot of things to consider here when you're doing this. But yeah, I didn't get that far. So that would be the question I would ask myself if I was in your guys' shoes. But otherwise, there's a bunch of stuff that's going on here. Scroll. Yes.
So is it suppressing pages? To not show them so they go faster?
It's not suppressing pages, it's suppressing elements of the page. What it's actually doing is it's just rendering an entirely different version of the page for AMP that is like certified by AMP. I think, man, I did a bunch of research and only documented some of it, so my apologies. But I know that there's a way, maybe it's in this article actually, how did I get to that?
The decision to show an AMP page is if you go to a page and it has the AMP tag inside of it, like, hey, Google, here's a reference to my AMP page. When Google indexes that, if you search in mobile and that page does have an AMP version, it will then show you that in the search results. That's the way it
works?
Yeah, but you'll never get an AMP result in the desktop. It only does it in mobile.
Okay, cool. I didn't know that. Oh, here we go. The AMP validator. Yes. So we can go to this AMP validator website, and it should, yes, allow us to put in a website. It'll be interesting to see what it does when I just hit the regular URL. I'm curious to see. Yeah, so I don't know if there's a setting that I haven't set up yet or not to like do what you were saying, which is like include some kind of meta information in the HTML that tells crawlers or whatever that there is an AMP version of the page. But obviously if we change this to /AMP, it will pass. Yeah. And so essentially what AMP is like, how do I describe this? It's I can't find the words to describe it. It's kind of like a blueprint. Like there's just certain HTML elements and features that need to be present in a page in order for it to be considered AMP, right? And so that's kind of what this plugin is doing, is it's taking the content that it knows it's supposed to present on the page and adding those where needing. So adding stuff where needed and removing stuff where needed in order for it to automatically pass this validation. So if we were to attempt to do this without WordPress, we would have to go back through our code on every page of our static website and go through this checklist of things that are considered to be AMP or whatever, and add them or remove them or make the page more dynamic. Use JavaScript to add or remove them in certain situations, probably using Monetizer or something like that. And that's a huge task. Like that would take any website designer or developer a very long time to do that. You're talking about, I don't know, probably a 2 to 4 week long project of just, hey, now I got to go back through my whole site and make it AMP compatible, if you want to call it that, or whatever, AMP worthy, AMP certified. I don't know. Where with this plugin, all I did was install it, activate it, change some settings, and now I just go to /AMP and there's a whole version of it. And it took me maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes or whatever. So another win for WordPress. This is why we use WordPress, so that we can dramatically change our website in crazy ways and save ourselves tons of time in the process. Cool. Any questions about that so far? I'm sure you have a ton of questions about AMP. I know a little bit more, but not a whole lot more, because again, I haven't actually like had to do a whole project where I have to change a static website and make it like fully AMP compatible. But obviously you can Google the word AMP and go to Google's documentation for AMP itself, and it will tell you. Is that the end of my All right, cool. That's the end of my presentation. I thought I had more slides than this. Sorry, like I said, I ran out of time. Yeah, but we'll talk about progressive web apps next. No questions about AMP? No? Just know that it's a thing, and yeah, the idea is let's fix this problem of how much data it takes to generate a page. We're not really talking about like Galaxy S10s connected to Wi-Fi, or even on 4G or 5G or maybe even 3G. We're talking about like people with like older devices that are much slower, that are on crappy connections. When we're talking about AMP, we're focusing on those users instead of focusing on the high-end users. Does that make sense to everybody?
Does AMP cost anything?
No. And again, AMP isn't like, well, okay, let me rephrase, because I think your question is a little bit more generic than you mean it to be. Because AMP isn't itself a product, right?
It's a plugin.
Well, in this case, AMP for WP is a plugin. And so the regular AMP for WP plugin does not cost anything. The premium version does. There are a lot of things that the premium version does that the free one doesn't. You're probably wondering what those are. It's stuff like being able to show pages with AMP. I think right out of the box it only does posts and your home page, and that's it. But yeah, in order to show pages, custom post types, a bunch of other things, you have to pay for that. There's a bunch of other stuff too. I don't know enough about the plugin. Obviously, the best way to learn is just to go look up the plugin. I'll do it for you. AMP for WP. And this is it. And then there will be a place that talks about the pro features somewhere, hopefully, on this page. No? Okay, cool. Link to the pro version, please. No, not that either, huh? That's surprising. Usually these websites or these plugins do that.
Premium support.
Where'd you see? Oh, there we go. Yes. Hopefully that takes me to a page to buy it. No, just support. Okay, well there's the pricing. It's a bit expensive. But I think what they're assuming is that like, if you're buying this thing, you're probably a big company. Otherwise, you're just going to get the free version. And big companies can pay big money for this type of stuff. And if you've got the traffic to justify it, it makes a lot of sense. I think there's a feature breakdown between the free and premium. Side-by-side table.
I think I saw that on the website, in the settings.
On WordPress, in WordPress itself?
WordPress, yeah.
Yes.
One caveat about AMP that you should consider is that if your website is geared towards conversion, like it's a website where you want people to land there and learn something or take an action like buy something, a lot of times the AMP experience will be so much more degraded from what you're normally doing that what you should do first is spend the time you might spend implementing AMP, making sure that your normal website is as good as it can be. And then if you're like, I need another verse to choose, then you have extra time, you could then and you try to implement the same thing. That's kind of the conventional list right
Yeah.
If you show ads, you also have those.
Yeah, that's definitely another thing to consider.
Towards display network, if you have any revenue coming out today, you can lose a lot of it if you implement AMP too.
But if your app is something that you want to work, your website is something you want to work really well, like in the developing world, like you're a global publisher, even a small global publisher, then it's really cool because AMP is great for somebody who has an edge network in India, right? So those are considerations for it.
Yeah, and I would have to do more research on this, but my guess would be that there is some way to, using Modernizer or some library like that that does browser detection, to be able to optionally show the AMP version or non-AMP version based on what browser they're using and maybe even what speed of connection that they have. I don't know. Does Modernizer, anybody here know if Modernizer detects your network like class or speed, whether you're on 3G or 4G or anything like that?
I don't think Modernizer does that.
It doesn't.
I don't think so.
I don't think it's enough. The browser doesn't have access to that.
Right.
Restricts.
Yeah. If they do, they've added it recently.
I
I don't think so.
I think the browser has access to it. I don't know if Modernizer
I think it has to be like
detects
a
it.
native app in order to do that.
Really?
Yeah. I don't
Well, then-
think you get it from the browser.
How does Google Analytics know then? If you're on that.
You know, and-
They know everything.
Yeah, Google Analytics finds out somehow. So yeah, I don't know, but I'm sure there's a way where you could like, based on what connection they're on, optionally show the AMP version or the regular version or whatever. Again, it's one of those things where like he said, if you're going through the trouble of making your website AMP compatible or AMP certified, you're probably already concerned about probably hundreds of thousands of users a day, if not more. And so that would justify you spending the time to do all that. But for regular websites where you're getting whatever, anywhere between 5 and 200 visits a day, it really doesn't make much sense to go through all this trouble, which is nice. Why it's nice there's a plugin. And so if you're really that concerned with it, you can slap the plugin on there and call it good. And of course, it probably, how much traffic your website gets that is mobile might like justify it, the use of the plugin even more. Like for instance, one of my clients is Tully's Kennels, which is a place where you can buy puppies here in town. And their mobile traffic is like through the roof. Like it's like 85% mobile and hundreds of visits a day. They should probably consider using AMP for that reason alone. But they would have to hire somebody like me to spend the time to go through and make sure that those pages show up the way that they want them to show up on AMP. But it would probably convert nicely and speed it up, especially since probably a lot of the people, the reason the traffic is so high, I believe, is because when people are out looking for puppies and they've made the decision that they're going to go get a dog, they are usually driving around to like the Humane Society and stuff and like kind of doing it all in like one day to try and find a dog. And so they're probably doing their research like online. And so they're probably Googling and then finding Tully's Kennels and deciding to go there kind of like in the car or on the fly, and a lot of those kids probably have cheap phones that aren't very powerful. And so that website would probably benefit from this. But I'm not going to do it for free, that's for sure. So they would have to pay somebody like me to go through the trouble to implement AMP on that site. So the next thing was PWAs. Now, I found several plugins that turn your WordPress site into a PWA. Probably the most prevalent one that I found was Super PWA, which is one of the logos that I used on the graphic for this meetup for a reason. And we'll go into what PWAs are in a second. Yeah. So this plugin essentially turns your website into a progressive web app. At this point, you're probably wondering, what is a progressive web app? What the heck does that have to do with responsiveness and WordPress and mobile and all those good things? I'm glad you thought of that because it makes you normal. So how about we just do this? How about we just, instead of me trying to give you my interpretation of a progressive web app, how about we just Google what a progressive web app is? I should have made a slide for this, but I just didn't get around to it. Actually, no, I think I found this one earlier, and then I found a better one. I didn't put it in a slide. Hold on. Go back. Yes. We want Google to tell us what a progressive web app is. Reliable, fast, and engaging. So that's the idea. Engaging, blah, blah, blah. Why build progressive web apps? Okay, tell us what it is. A checklist of what makes your site a progressive web app. All right, so it has to be served over HTTPS first and foremost. Your pages have to be responsive on tablets and mobile devices. Every single page, and this is probably the biggest one that a lot of people associate with the idea of a PWA, any page on your site needs to be loadable or accessible while offline, right? So for those of you that are like thinking about PWAs the first time, you're probably wondering how the heck does it load the page without a connection to the interwebs? Okay, so I'll give you my interpretation of it. Feel free to go out and research this on your own after the fact. Basically, what's happening is it uses what are called service workers to take data from your website and store it locally on your device. So you have to have gone to this site with a connection initially at some point, right? So if you can't, there's no way it would work going to the site for the first time offline and have the website load up. That's impossible. But the idea being, like any other app, right? If I download an app from the App Store, I should be able to open that app on my phone without being connected to the internet because the app is loaded onto my phone. So that's why they're called progressive web apps, is by visiting the site, you are downloading a bunch of data onto your phone that is designed to be loaded up and shown after the fact, either without a connection altogether or before your connection is even fully established in the first place, right? So think of it as like saving a very basic snapshot of your website onto the device itself, and then that way when they go to the site, they just see that snapshot right away, and meanwhile, it's attempting to make the connection to your site to get fresh data, and then once it's gotten all that fresh data, replacing that snapshot with the fresh data. And that's kind of what service workers do, is they, first of all, manage like the knowing of what content is to be saved onto the device, and then also manage that connection, right? So manage the showing of that data, like presenting the data that's saved, and then also attempting to get the fresh data and like tapping into your browser's already existing system that is responsible for making all the HTTP requests to load the page. Does that make sense to everybody? So again, feel free to go ahead and like research this after the fact, but that's like probably the biggest thing about progressive web apps, because that's what makes them like an app, right? The idea of, so if you wanted to make a progressive web app that wasn't just like a website, that was more like an actual app, the idea being that you could design those service workers and manipulate that system in a fashion that would allow you to deploy an app to users that completely circumvents the Play Store or the iOS App Store or whatever, to where you could push updates from your website to the app on somebody's phone, right? If you use it in that way. So there's, I guess, there's a few different applications of PWAs. You could use PWA like practices to make your website faster and more responsive and more mobile user-friendly type thing, or you can actually build a whole app as a PWA and then like serve it from your website instead of from like any app store, if that makes any sense. So 2 different ways to use PWAs. I love how that rhymes. Yeah. So kind of what this plugin does is it installs the service workers and allows you to configure how those service workers work, and take kind of in the same way that the AMP for WP plugin like takes bits of your content and like decides which bits to display where, and will take pieces of your website and like permanently store them on the user's device, so that when they return back to your page, they serve up those stored assets and then refresh those assets after it's loaded that. So it's the old switcherooski. Does that make sense? I'm definitely oversimplifying it just so that I can like get you all to understand the concept behind it. There's more to it than that, but yeah. And you could spend some time going through the features here, and there's different ways you can make it do different things in the settings. Oh, well, here's their interpretation of what a progressive web app is. It's a middle ground between a website and a mobile app. They're installed on a phone like a normal app and can be accessed from the home screen. Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. Push notifications are also part of service workers. So I guess and we'll talk about push notifications in a second, because that's another thing you need to think about when you're thinking about mobile and what your website wants to do. I would say that by default, when you're considering making your website a PWA, you're kind of already lumping notifications into that consideration and conversation. It's kind of already part of the deal, essentially. But if you don't want to go through all of the crazy PWA and you just want notifications for whatever reason, there's another plugin we'll talk about in a bit that I guess is a lighter, since you're not worrying about all the other PWA stuff, you're only doing notifications, then it's just a lighter plugin. Obviously easier to configure and whatnot. This is a much more robust, bigger plugin. Oh, and that's a nice feature. Multi-site compatible, which not a lot of plugins are. Yeah. This is definitely designed to be more of an overview, not like a deep dive into any of these things. And again, I'll reiterate, I expected other people to do this talk with me. So I was hoping that if we spread the work out across 4 people, we could each, all 4 of us, dive deeper into our respective parts. But since that didn't happen, I'm doing the best I can to just give you a light overview of all of them. Any questions about PWAs?
So will this show somewhere in particular on your website if you have this? Am I looking at it wrong? Is it going to show like an app, like on your phone? Or
You can make it do that, yes. So you can, what it'll allow you to do is essentially present a button that will be kind of like an install button or something. And all it's really going to do is create like an app icon on your home screen for you that essentially is just a reference to the website itself, but with a little bit more than just that. So it's also going to tell your browser that, hey, you're going to visit this website, but the service worker is going to tell you, oh, wait, this is a website that I have like static assets for on the phone, right? And when I say static assets, I mean like it's literally creating a directory on your phone, on your mobile device, and storing a bunch of stuff in that directory, much like an app works already on your phone, right? So that's what they mean by like a middle ground between a full-blown app and like a static website. Is it's gonna create a directory on your phone. It's gonna store a bunch of like assets. It could be images, it could be JavaScript files, it could be text files, it could be all sorts of things. And then those service workers are going to be responsible with telling the browser where those assets go in the page, and then whether or not to go and try to get new ones, right? And so in the case of being offline, where you have no internet connection, it's basically just going to try and make a connection and fail and just continue to allow you to use the site as is. And don't think this is just the home page either. You could have multiple pages loaded onto the device and make it so that they browse if you have a small enough website, I guess, browse your whole site offline. But again, it's only going to be assets that it acquired the last time you visited while you had a connection.
So that if I do any updates and when they go to the site, I'm assuming that it's gonna automatically update that once they go to the site when they're actually online.
Correct. That's one of the responsibilities of the service worker, is when it goes to the site while they are online, is refreshing those assets. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. It's a good question. It's kind of a complex topic, and honestly, PWAs are a very new technology. They've only been around for maybe 2 years tops, I would say, if that. I don't know. Even 2 years ago, they were so new that hardly anybody was really talking about them. Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. There's a few different ways to approach making a PWA. I would say one of the more popular ways of approaching making a PWA is with the intention of actually making a PWA. Hey, I want to make a progressive web app, kind of like one would sit down and say, I want to make a mobile app or something. This is a different approach. This is more of a, hey, let's try to take as much as we can from our existing WordPress site and convert it into something that's like a PWA, essentially. Yes.
So it refreshes, PWA refreshes only when you're web connected and go to the actual site?
Correct.
Because, I know that what PWA does, maybe it makes for the auto connect without the web, but it doesn't refresh until the next time you're connected to the web and actually go to the site, right?
Yes, correct. It won't refresh itself without attempting to connect to the site. Yeah. Much like a regular app, right? Even like a PC app, right? It's the PC app isn't going to attempt to update itself until the next time I fire it up, right? Yeah, same type of thing. Good questions, though. And again, I'm not a super expert on PWAs. I just know enough to kind of sound like I know what I'm talking about. Plus, I'm a nerd, and so I just learn about all sorts of new tech, and so I'm fascinated by this stuff. But I've definitely not built a PWA from scratch, nor have I created a website that uses this plugin either. In an ideal world, I would have a whole bunch of websites just lying around to try and implement this stuff whenever I feel like it, but I don't. So I thought about trying to add this plugin to the wpomaha.org website, but the problem is that over time, as I talk about all these new technologies at all these talks, I can't just keep adding plugin after plugin after plugin to wpomaha.org. And so again, I would have to have a bunch of I don't know, just demo blah sites just spun up on some server somewhere that I could just hey, I'm gonna spin up some my random junk site and try to throw this plugin on there. It takes a long time to do this stuff, so yeah. But it's definitely cool technology. It's definitely cool to know this exists. I wouldn't say that this is something that every website should implement. It's not like a Yoast or a Google Analytics or something like that, where every site should have it. It's more of a situational type of thing. It depends on your audience for the website. It depends on what your website is for, whether it's more of a application style of website versus a informative style of website. So something that would make sense, I suppose, is maybe if you had a website that showed you all of the coolest places to bar crawl in Omaha, right? And that's all the website was for. Maybe it was called omahabarcrawl.com, and we've got several different bar crawl ideas that you could go on depending on the different part of Omaha that you're in or something, or maybe different styles, and maybe you want a craft beer bar crawl or you want a martini bar crawl or whatever, right? If we built a website like that, it might make sense to use Super PWA because, saving some maps on a page, they're kind of, it's kind of like static stuff. It's not going to really change very often. Once we, come up with a bar crawl, it's that and nothing else, you know what I mean? And so that type of a situation would be kind of cool to have as a PWA, because then if for whatever reason they have no connection, like say you're in Benson where you can't ever get a good connection, you got to hope people have Wi-Fi, which a lot of them don't. Having something like that would be handy, because then you would try to hit that app, it would just fire up whatever assets it found last time it hit the site, and it wouldn't matter what connection you had, what connection speed you had, the site would just pop up right away, and it might try to refresh itself in the background or whatever, but if it doesn't, who cares? All I want to do is jump on there and see, hey, what's the next place on our bar crawl or whatever, right? So that would be
Conference scheduling is really good too.
What I'm sorry?
Conference schedules.
Oh, yeah.
So you have all those people in the conference. They don't have to continuously download that when they're trying to figure out what the next block of things are.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, absolutely.
The people, or like the group of businesses that are really driving PWA are like retailers, because they don't want to expend the resources to develop an Apple app and Google app with different languages, technologies, APIs, and their website. So what they're doing is from the beginning designing their website as if it were an app. And I think now Google will even let you take your progressive web app and list it in the Google Play Store, and then it will accept that instead of like you had to build in Java.
The Play Store do that now?
I believe so.
That's
They
crazy.
just started, or they're going to be rolling out. Like it's relatively new.
Wow,
I
that's
read
crazy.
something about it here.
And kind of what they're pointing out is that so many of the apps they get are really just websites that were bundled up in a frame, and they have to reject a lot of stuff, and then it gets very cheap.
Interesting. I would have thought, when I first started hearing about this, I would have thought that it would be like a direct competitor to the Play Store, so that they would kind of like discourage that type of thing and kind of act like it doesn't exist. That's fascinating.
Well, why act like it doesn't exist if you can just take it over and make it your own? That's how Google rules the world.
Yeah, I suppose. And it's not like there's not enough free apps on there already anyway, so it's just another free app, right? Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, Google has a lot of content on how to do that, and how to build your progressive web app with videos and all that.
Notice they design the spec.
Right, yeah. I was trying to find...
I believe so. So if you have a PWA, you can bundle that up.
So does it
I
work on
had
an
a
iPhone?
question.
Yes.
Just thinking about your kennel site, the majority of that doesn't change a lot except for whichever dogs are coming up now. Would that be a candidate for BWI?
So, I probably not, only because in this specific client, I know updates. So they have a whole page that shows what puppies they have at any given
I
time.
like the Humane Society. My wife goes to the Humane Society
Yeah.
at least once a day to see what new.
Sorry, Chewbacca's telling me to take it out the trash, like usual. Anybody who's come to more than one of these meetups knows that. Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean
I'm just
to.
thinking of a site that is hit a lot, but has a small amount of new data. Would that be what a PWA would be for?
I think when you're talking about that kind of stuff, aggressive caching would probably be a better solution.
Okay.
Again, it's because that client specifically, I know for a fact they're updating what puppies are available every single day.
Sure.
Multiple times a day, actually. And so getting the older data, I mean, the only benefit you would get would be decreased page load or perceived page load speed when you're using it. That would be the only perk. So there would be a benefit there for sure. And then, of course, if they wanted to do notifications and stuff like that as well, no doubt. I mean, like, that's another benefit of a PWA.
I've never heard of the PWA till tonight, so I just kind of trying to justify why you would do it, or what would be the sweet spot.
Sure.
So with these PWAs, I looked at this a couple of years ago, and it was it was mainly just Google and Apple was totally not there. Especially with like the notifications and stuff. Is that still the same way? I mean,
What do you mean by Apple and Google are not there?
Well, I know that with the if you try to do push notifications, that it, and I looked and it looks like Apple Safari doesn't support it yet.
That's entirely possible.
So if you're creating a PWA, is that only going to be able to work on an Android or?
So that's where the last plugin that we were going to talk about, I think, kind of steps in, and I could be wrong. What is it called again? Signal something or another. Signal. What is it? Signal push notifications. I'll try to find this again real quick. I guess I could just go to the meetup and look it up. But yes, One Signal. Yeah. So I think what this One Signal service does, and that's why they're better push notifications, is I believe with the pro version, what you're actually paying for is the ability to like also push notifications the way Apple wants you to do it,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Right.
So they're using probably HTTP requests and whatnot to actually go through the Apple push notification system to do that type of thing. Not quite the same as what happens with service workers using Chrome. Like there's an ability in Android for Chrome to be able to send push notifications to the push notification system in Android. So I guess there's like a tighter marriage between the two there because it's Android and Google and they're kind of like, I don't know, like more closely related, and so it's like a Chrome thing. I don't think that Safari, I don't know what it is. I don't think that Apple is quite on board with it yet because I think they're still looking at it as like competition to the Apple App Store.
Right. So my situation was, I do dog sports, and there's a fly ball tournaments where races come up, and people want to be notified when it's time for their dogs to race. So I thought I'd do a PWA, and they would, you know, it would be a website. They go to the website and they say, okay, I'm on this team, and when the time comes up, I want to be notified. So when that team comes up, and it almost worked, but it was such a new technology that it would only work on Android, and it was just kind of flaky. but it didn't work at all on Apple just because that. And that Signal thing didn't work because you have to be on the Signal site and put the notifications in one at a time. So there was no way to program it to say, you know, when the person working at the desk hits a button and the next races come up, then send whoever's in those teams, send them notifications.
Right. I get what you're saying, yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, Apple just likes to keep their ecosystem like very tight and close knit, and I guess like they play their cards close to their chest, and so it's not. Yeah, I'm not surprised that they're not quite there yet. I'm surprised that Safari hasn't gotten there, but it seems like it's definitely happening. It's just not a thing yet.
That's what they said 2 years ago.
Yeah, and you know what? Safari's kind of notorious for that too. Safari's notorious for being like, oh yeah, we love new web standards and bleeding edge technology. We are all about it for like all sorts of things, not just, you know, whatever, service workers and stuff. But they're always kind of slow to get there. But it's still better than Internet Explorer, where they're just like, no, we're not going to do it, so just go away. Like they do eventually get there. It's just usually a longer process with Safari, where like Firefox and Google Chrome are kind of always on it. I would say it would still be worth trying out though. Like iPhones are super popular around here, I'm not gonna lie, but at least for the Android users, like they'd be able to like reap the benefits. So I would still play around with it just to see how it goes. And if the Apple users don't get the notifications and they don't get the notifications, you know, who cares? But if I were you, I would still play with it.
Yeah, I'll try it again. It's been a couple years.
Who knows? Maybe by the time you get it all done, Safari will be on board with it. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
I would still try it. It still sounds like fun to me. I don't have a use case for it myself personally, but yeah, cool. I don't really want to dive into this one signal thing. Excuse me, too much. Just because it's not really just a WordPress plugin. Like they have a WordPress plugin, but it's more of a web service than it is a WordPress plugin. So like you can not use WordPress at all and still use this service. Just know that there's a WordPress plugin. It's mainly just for notifications. So essentially what you're doing is using WordPress to manage your notifications to a certain extent, and you're just using RESTful APIs to communicate to the existing web service and then have it do its thing from there. I haven't experimented with this, so I don't know firsthand how nice it works. It would have totally been cool if I would have been like, oh yeah, cool. So one signal, like check it out. We're gonna do it right now. Boom, boom, boom. You guys all get notifications. Like that would have taken a lot of preparation. So yeah, I'll just say that I know it's highly rated. I did enough research to know that it is like kind of one of the standards in this technology. And like if I had the use case, I would probably attempt to use this, but I don't, so I haven't. So just know it's a thing. Just know it's possible to do this type of stuff. And if you want to play around with just notifications specifically, go for it. It is definitely included in part of the user experience. This is totally mobile, and this is something we should consider when we're talking about websites and phones. So that's really the only reason I brought it up. Plus, I kind of wanted a fourth thing to throw in there. So I'm not gonna lie. That was another thing. Is if you want notifications specifically, know that your website, your WordPress site, can do that type of thing to some extent right out of the box right now. Well, not right out of the box, with a plugin right out of the box. Cool. Any questions about any of that? I know I kind of flew through everything. I didn't get super deep in anything. I was hoping there would be more questions. I was also hoping there'd be more people. But yeah, sure. We'll blame it on NBA stuff or whatever.
Ryan has a question from the YouTube.
Yes, thank God you're watching that. All right.
I am. I showed up and it was useful. The question is, so AMP is rendering based on the device sniffer?
AMP is rendering based on the device sniffer.
So is AMP rendering based on the device?
I don't know what they mean by the device sniffer. I don't know what a device sniffer is or what that means.
I can answer this.
Go for it, yeah.
So AMP is only going to render if when Google indexes your site, it sees that you have an AMP version, which is actually a different URL, and it would then present that AMP URL instead of your canonical normal URL in the search results. So when you click on that, it is going to load that AMP URL instead.
Gotcha.
But when somebody comes to your site, they're not going to get the AMP version of the page because they're on a phone, right? So the only typical path to an AMP page is through a Google search result.
Okay. So in case you couldn't hear, did they even got their name on there?
It's Ryan90. I'm typing it in right now.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So Ryan90, if you're watching right now, basically what he said was, it is through the Google search result that you're being linked to the AMP version of the page, not just hitting the website directly from your phone. Yeah. I'm sure there's there's got to be a way that you could control whether or not they're presented with the AMP version of the page simply by going to the domain. But I think you'd have to do some kind of trickery there in order to get that to happen. It's probably not even that difficult, but it's definitely manual. You would have to intentionally go in and program your page to do something along those lines. Yeah, thanks for knowing that, yeah.
I was curious who you were teaching web development for.
I taught a web design class at the Creative Center this semester. The semester's already ended, the class is over, and actually graduation is this weekend. So, yeah. Not currently sure whether or not I will be engaging in that endeavor again next year. At this point in time, I'll say it's uncertain.
What's the Creative Center?
They are a trade school for graphic artists and graphic designers located on 108th and Maple. It's a private school, but you can get a full-blown bachelor's degree of fine arts through the school. So that's kind of their big selling point. And they have been around for 25 years. It's a fairly well-respected graphic design school. But it is specifically a graphic design school and nothing else. Like, that is all it is. I don't. Trying to choose my words carefully here.
You're on a live stream.
Yeah, I know.
It's on the interweb.
I would be. I think it would be safe to say that a bachelor's from there is not going to carry the same weight as a bachelor's from, like, even a community college. But it is a very specific. If you know that you specifically only want to be a graphic designer and that's it, from my history from me personally trying to seek employment as a graphic designer, I know it's effective. I have been beat out for jobs by people who went to the Creative Center for sure, and historically. I don't know what how the job market is reacting to degrees from there today, because I haven't tried to get a job as a graphic designer in a while. So I couldn't speak to that, but I definitely know back when I was, which was back in between 2006 to 2010. I was definitely, it was hard for me to get a job as a graphic designer because I didn't have a degree from there. So yeah, it's just an adjunct class. It's more of the web design class there is more of a elective type of thing, except it's not really an elective. Like, they don't give you the option whether or not you're going to take the class, but it's not a primary class because they make you take other classes there in order for it to be like a bachelor's, right? So they make them take classes like ecology and stuff like that, even though that's got nothing to do with graphic design. It's just part of the accreditation. And so the web design class is lumped into that type of a situation where it's not really like a primary class. But it does make sense that somebody with a graphic design degree would know some web design. So that's why I was excited to teach there. But I overestimated how interested in the topic a lot of these students would be. I was a little bit too optimistic.
Well, the advantage they would have is they know how to make pictures. For the majority of us who just do web design, go, where's the picture? Where can I see the picture?
And that's what I tried to explain to them too, actually, is I told them and that's why I was so excited to teach there, because since I come from a graphic design background, I have found personally through my experience that it actually gives me a huge advantage in edge as a web developer these days to have that design background, where a lot of people that only have like a degree in IT or are only developers lack a lot of those design kind of skills or underlying concepts. And so I'm actually able to create much more attractive UIs and apply those design concepts in my development. And it definitely gives me a huge advantage over strictly developers. And that's something I tried to communicate to them, but still, it depends on what type of graphic designer you are. And I think some of them in the class were very much like, I want to make the best printed advertisements I can in the whole industry. And I was like, okay, well, more power to you. Go make those posters and stuff, I guess, if that's what you want to do. But yeah.
With those giant printers and some of those companies.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we progress in the future, well, let's just say the market's diminishing there as we go into the future, not growing. I prefer to be in a growing market myself, so yeah. Any other questions about anything at all? It doesn't even have to be about mobile first stuff, WordCamp or anything. What our next talk is going to be, I don't know. We figure that out on the fly, usually at Old Chicago after one of these, which is another thing. If anybody's interested in joining me and maybe Zach, are you down? Yeah, usually it's me and Zach up there. Some of us will go to Old Chicago on Cass Street after this and continue conversation and just chat and ask each other questions and stuff like that. So any of you all are all welcome to join us up there after this if you want. Cool. All right, well, I guess we'll just go ahead and wrap up early then. I've got nothing else. Again, if you have any questions, if you try to engage in any of this after the fact and you have questions, reach out to us on Slack. You can message me on Meetup. And then I would love it very much if other people decided they wanted to do a talk themselves at one of these meetups, because I like to listen to other people talk and learn from other people too. So, and even though you may be a beginner to WordPress, I'd like to believe that everybody's got some kind of little pocket of knowledge that I don't, or that a lot of people don't, that they could share with everybody else. So by all means, feel free to request to speak in the future and suggest topics and such. Otherwise, I'll keep cooking up crazy ideas like, I don't know, just trying to make a play on Game of Thrones to make a topic for the next meetup or something. Yeah, because that's literally all it was. Actually, I was excited about a talk I was going to at NEJS that was called the Scoville scale of web font loading or something like that. It was a great talk, by the way. And so I thought he called it that because of the rise of popularity in like hot sauces right now and like the show Hot Ones on YouTube and stuff. I thought that's what he was playing at. Well, it turns out he wasn't. But then I was like, well, I could come up with some, whatever catchy, use pop culture style of talk as well. And so that's how I thought of Game of Phones, and that's now why we're talking about phones. So it just, I don't know, fit together nicely. Will I do that again in the future? I don't know. Given this turnout, maybe not. I don't know, but I just keep trying to make this stuff catchy and entertaining for people. I don't know. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody. We have a lot of sandwiches in the back. If you guys want to take some home or whatever, you got kids, knock yourselves out. Otherwise, we usually give the sandwiches away to people that are here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Interesting.
Rob,
Yes.
is